Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming to the second day of the conference. Today we have Mike Pearson. He's technical lead for Lenovo Linux PC team. He worked with Linux for 20 years and with the Lenovo Linux PC team for 3 years. So Mike, the floor is yours. Mark.
Thank you. Wow. Alrighty. Thanks, everybody. So, just hello. This is my first time doing a presentation to real-life people. So, yeah, I've done this online, but thank you, everybody, for coming along and suffering. So, I really hope this works. Yay! So, I really like this to be a two-way conversation. I think I've said this for all my online presentations that I've done before, but I kind of want to hear back from everybody. The reason I'm here is because I want to hear from you guys. So this is kind of a list of potential topics. We don't have to talk about them if we don't want. If I don't get questions, I will just keep barreling through them to keep you entertained. But those are some of them. If you sit there and go, yeah, I really want to know about that, just let me know. I am going to do the first two, which you can't really read, but introduction and this year's platforms. I'm going to do those regardless, just while people think of questions. And then after that, genuinely, let me know what you want to know about, any questions, anything, please do. I am around for the whole week as well, and I would love to hear from people, Debian experiences on Lenovo laptops, basically anything. Come find me, come talk to me, that's what I'm here for. Alrighty, so introduction, we got the brief one, so I'm Mark Pearson, technical lead for the Linux PC team. So basically my job is to get Linux running on Lenovo PCs. That's kind of what I'm passionate about. So I have worked with Linux for 20 odd years. I started by accident. People left and they were like, Mark, look after this, and that's how I got into it. The last line is just my kids bet me that I would not put that on a presentation, so I did. And the good-looking one is my dog Nix. So yeah, I've been working with Linux a while, and I work with all the distros. And I had a whole bunch of things to say, but my memory's gone blank. So there we go. Platforms 22. So yeah, this is the only slide that you have to suffer through after that's off. So I listened to quite a few Linux podcasts and talked to a lot of people, and there was quite a bit of sort of like Lenovo's giving up on Linux was some of the comments that I heard last year. That really isn't true. And if you're interested, I can explain what happened last year, and last year was rough. But yeah, we are still, the Lenovo Linux team is very busy. So I actually thought, I hope I'm not going to get into trouble for this, but I thought I'd actually put up some of what we do, just so you can sit there and go, yeah, they're doing it. So we actually have 36 plus platforms, and I put them on the side there. They're roughly, so Intel ones, AMD, and Workstation, a mix of them, but I put them separately. Not in the list is we also have ThinkCentre platforms. Previously, I've never really talked about ThinkCentre because they were not doing Linux properly, but they are now. They are putting firmware on LVFS, doing all the right things. So with the ThinkCentre, I haven't listed them there, but if you're into your desktops, are there. And we have a new business, the ThinkEdge, for edge platforms, which we're involved with. And it's kind of interesting because it's Linux first. Like edge platforms want Linux first rather than Windows. So from my team's point of view, that's been a different experience and a good one. What's really fun and challenging about what I do is working with new hardware. So getting Linux running on new hardware is hard. If you take a platform that's a year or 2 years old, it's much easier to get Linux running. Getting it on the brand new cutting-edge hardware you rely on support from the hardware vendors. And that's to get a lot of what I do. So we have some interesting technology coming out this year. So on the Intel front, we have the Alder Lake CPUs. For those who haven't followed this, the Alder Lakes are interesting. They've got the performance cores and the E-cores. So they have different cores. It's certainly from a Linux enablement point of view, I mean, Intel have done a fantastic job. They had it all out and ready, but it certainly proved a thermal challenge to get that working. That's kept us entertained. AMD have got a new client Linux team. AMD are doing some fantastic stuff. They're really, really great to work with. We have the new Z series. I do have, so I only brought a couple of laptops. So I have, this is the one I'm presenting on, is the Yoga 7, running Debian. presenting, so this is a note. This is my first year that I've been able to present on Debian and it not fall over on me, so I'm really happy about that. I do have a, I do have a Z13 as well. I was going to bring more platforms, but I went carry-on only because of all the horror stories about traveling. But if anybody wants to play with those, come hit me up and you can have a play. I'm sorry I couldn't bring more, maybe next year. But yeah, the Z series is very interesting, Rembrandt-based, and it's looking like a smoking hot laptop. And then yeah, there's this. We have some new platforms. Our portfolio is increasing, which is good, and I'm personally very happy about. We've added the L series AMD. What might be interesting, I get a lot of questions about the lower end. We do ThinkPads, but we've added the E series this time, which is good. So that's kind of sort of cheaper model. We are still not doing idea pads, which I know lots of people want. We don't have Linux support on those yet, officially. Alrighty, covered everything. So, you have suffered through the pieces that I was going to force on you. Are there any questions? Are there any topics that people really, really want to hit up? And it's like, from the list, it's like, yeah, I really want to know about that. Hello. And just as a reminder.
Hi, Mark. Hi, Mark.
Hello.
What do we need to do to get the idea pads in? Because we've been discussing that for 2 years and there was no progress.
Yeah, no, I agree. There is, it's funny, it's covered a little bit on my issues with last year. Lenovo's, one of the things it is good at is listening to customers. So the main thing is I can go and say we should be doing Linux on the idea pads, but my voice is worth a fair bit, but not enough. So it's the product teams who need to know. So you basically let Lenovo know that you want to buy idea pads with it. If you do buy one, the best way, you get a customer survey, sit there and put in there, I wanted to buy this with Linux. That's a really good way of doing it. You can post on forums, you can post on blogs saying, I wanted to buy this, but with Linux. They have to know. They have to know there's a business case for it. I might just talk about last year's issues just to sort of explain. That might help set why less happened than maybe expected. So I'm going to do that just so you can understand some of the challenges with getting Linux running, and then you can bear that in mind against with why these things don't happen overnight. So is that okay? So sort of segueing you, really. So let's see if this works. Yay! Alrighty, so last year was rough. Last year was a real challenge. So I actually, we have key performance indicators we have to sign up for at the beginning of the year to say what we're going to achieve. And one of mine was to try and get the Linux platforms out much closer in time for with the Windows release, because we always lag. Let's just say I didn't meet that one. And not really through my fault. So we had the X1 Carbon was our first platform out. We actually had one of the Canonical guys, one of the engineers. We worked closely with Canonical on the certification of our platforms. He actually came in from Chinese New Year holiday a day early to get the image ready. We thought we were going to hit release at the same time as Windows, which for us is unheard of. And we hit this panel refresh issue. Basically, you were getting glitches on the panel, and the inputs lagged. And it was only seen on the OLED panel. But it was enough that we couldn't release. We don't release if we've got issues, so you know you're buying something that is going to work well. And that basically clobbered the release. I think we were a month and a half, 2 months before we got, working with the Intel engineers to figure out the problems, send them out. If you do anything in Linux, it takes time. You have to find the fix, you have to get the fix, you have to get it accepted upstream with the maintainer's blessing. And then the next piece is you get it up into Linus's tree, and then it comes down into the distros. We are able to shortcut that somewhat, particularly with Ubuntu and Fedora that we work with closely. We can, if it's been accepted by a maintainer, we can sometimes get it pulled in early. And I don't know if Ben is here. I wanted to talk to the Debian kernel team about how we help Debian potentially achieve the same if you want, and we can cover that later. But anyway, so that was it. And then after that, it just got worse. So there were huge Wi-Fi component shortages last year. So they kept switching the Wi-Fi component on us. And again, same issue. You're running Linux, it's like, okay, we're switching you from MediaTek Wi-Fi. And so you need your new Wi-Fi driver. And then that has to land upstream. And okay, and we just about get it done. Like, oh no, we've run out of MediaTek, we're going to switch you for Realtek, and then we're going to switch you for Qualcomm. So it was relentless. And I will say, one of the things that I think is very reassuring, and I think is important for not just Lenovo, this is across the industry, but hardware vendors are doing these drivers. And that's huge, right? Intel and AMD are kind of a given. They're going to be there, but you have all these other vendors for touchpads and Wi-Fi and networking devices and all that are doing Linux drivers, and they're doing it sooner than ever before. Before you would have had to wait a solid year or more before drivers started getting there, and you maybe had to reverse engineer it. No, all of the vendors are on it because, not just us, but because of the work the vendors are doing, and because there is now genuinely a Linux market. And that's as a Linux user, from my point of view, that's amazing. But anyway, so that hit us. We had Intel networking driver issues. That's always interesting because of the ME, the vPro versus non-vPro. There were issues. So I got to know the Intel networking team well. Again, great bunch of engineers. AMD power issues with sleep. Do we have any AMD platform users here that run Linux? Have you had issues with sleep, perchance?
I'm running on an idea pad,
so yeah, but does your suspend work?
It does work.
Oh, was it painful? Yeah. Okay. And I mean, AMD have done a fantastic job there, but last year it was challenging. Any NVIDIA users out here? No. Oh yeah. Do you use Nouveau or do you use NVIDIA binary driver? Yeah. Okay. So yeah, the NVIDIA driver's a constant source of trouble for Linux. We had particular fun. So we do energy certification on our laptops, so you know that they're going to behave well. The NVIDIA driver worked in performance mode, but it would fail energy certification. So there's a lot of work, and NVIDIA did it. You've got to give them credit. They did it, but we didn't actually release our NVIDIA-based platforms until January. And then, yeah, general shortages. So I know one of the common complaints, and I completely understand, is I want to go buy these systems. Where are they? And so we were late with everything, and the shortages. So I go to a web team and say, hey, can you go put up the P1 Gen 4? And they're like, we've got no supply. There's 6 months delays, and so that really sucks. And it meant I did hear a few comments like Lenovo giving up on Linux. It's like, no, we worked our asses off last year, but we're going to go to sleep. Hello, I should have turned that off. Okay, remind me to go and toggle the mouse every now and then. Anyway, so the good news out of all this, we did actually deliver Linux on all our platforms. We did. We achieved every single one. We got them all certified. So that was what I was meant to cover at the beginning. We certify with Ubuntu all our platforms. We do Red Hat certification on a bunch of them, mostly workstation related. We do a Fedora release on a bunch of them. Again, not all, but a bunch. But anyway, so we did actually get Linux on that. I think it worked out as 40 plus last year. It was around 40, maybe a bit less. We did actually get, despite all this, we actually got platforms online in North America, Europe, India, which was new for me, and Australasia. So the main reason that's exciting from my point of view is I actually got those web teams to engage and put some platforms online. So the platforms were up late. They weren't up for long, but they were up. And that's actually, that's a win, believe it or not. And I'm optimistic for this year. Close ties with the hardware vendors. One of the things I found, we worked a lot with Canonical, with Red Hat, and honestly, both those companies have some amazing Linux engineers. They are huge for the ecosystem. But one of the things I found is that we needed closer ties with the hardware vendors. And so me personally, but my team also, we've been developing closer, I work with all these hardware vendors and more directly, and that helps because ultimately we're the customer, so we can help drive them on behalf of the Linux engineers. And then, yeah, the rest is... So I will touch on the idea pad. So the reason I went through all this, sorry, it was a long answer to your question. So we are doing some low end, but I have had some limited success on even the non-Linux certified. So I'm on a lot of forums. We have our Lenovo Linux forums. And there were a few fixes we managed to get in on non-certified platforms, and I can't remember which ones. It's very much at the whim of the firmware teams for those, if they do it. but we did have a few where we were able to get fixes in that meant Linux would run on them. It's not going to be perfect, but it would run. Did I cover you? Did I answer your question? Kind of.
Explained the huge problems inside a large organization, and I feel with you. The path towards getting that solved is still a bit opaque. I think if we've been talking before, if the work that you're doing on getting the specifications out of the hardware vendors in a way that we can use them, that they're not under NDA, and there's kind of a best effort on your firmware teams, on the platform support, there is still the open source community. You as a manufacturer, of course, it is totally awesome if you develop a complete system and you have a pre-install image for Debian sometime. That's all great. We're totally striving towards that. But in the meantime, you can kind of just enable the community to fix the holes where your organization may not be able to do so at the moment because it may not be driven by enough, for example, pending revenue. Because this is kind of a cat and a mouse game. The thing is, like, if you are running on the lower end devices, the ones which are like more likely to be taken by non-technical users, you would have a lot of adoption. But people don't buy the thing with Windows, throw it out, put Debian on, and find 3 things not working, and then use that for their 100 people shop. And you're not getting the more expensive platforms sold there, so you're in between rock and hard place.
No, I completely 100% agree, and definitely there is some trickle down. Ultimately, right? There's the work done on the ThinkPads helps the IdeaPads. There's definitely that, but that's kind of a slow path. I don't know to accelerate it. And I know one of the things I've become more aware of is how much gets done by that boot and EC firmware, and relying on Lenovo to fix that is sometimes painful, realistically. So yeah, I agree. I do think there's a lot of what I'm doing is making sure that Lenovo thinks about Linux when they release a platform. That's important, and I think that helps. If they choose vendors with driver support, that makes a difference. If they add the support in their BIOS, even if we're not necessarily certifying it, that makes a difference. But yeah, and then for opening up hardware specifications, and that's a challenge. That's not what they're used to. I think it might happen. I think there's a lot of amazing things happening in the industry right now. Like, there's spoiled for choice with the number of platforms that are Linux first out there. And I probably shouldn't say that in a Lenovo presentation, but it's great as a Linux user these days, the choices that we have, which is good. And honestly, it helps. It pushes us too. And I think that's great. Cool. Hello.
So, hi Mark. It's awesome to see you here in person. Thank you for coming to talk to us.
Actually, I have an apology to make. I really want to go to your presentation, but I'm on the plane. So I looked at it, I was like, that's must be. So I do want to talk to you at some point this week.
Awesome. So, I'm going to ask, well, the elephant in the room is obvious. I'm the team lead of the Debian UEFI team.
Oh, lucky you.
Which means I get to do shim and secure boot and stuff.
Yes.
Can we go on to your next point, please?
Did you want to talk about that secured core PC thing or something different?
How did you guess?
This was fun, actually. So just as a bit of history, I took a week vacation 2 weeks ago, and I checked my emails on the Friday night, and whoo boy. So actually, now let's see if this works. Well, that's the best way to do it. So actually, I'm going to start off just so secure core PC is. Let me just introduce it. It's a Windows requirement. Well, it's not a requirement this year, but it's going to come to all the vendors. So Windows 11 secured core PC. If you want your PC certified, you have to meet a number of things. You have to have a TPM. You have to secure enabled. And then Windows put in this nice little extra. So the third-party UFA certificate, which Steve knows about, but just for anybody else, that's used to sign the shim, and the shim is what Debian, any Linux distro uses to then launch their own signed kernel, which is signed with a Debian key, canonical key, whatever. So Linux relies ultimately on the Microsoft third-party key to be able to boot secure boot. Is that a reasonable summary? And so Microsoft put in this requirement to disable the third-party key by default. And so that means if you go buy X1 Carbon 10 with Windows on it, and you go put in your Linux USB stick, if you haven't disabled secure boot, it won't boot, and it used to. So that's kind of, there is a very good blog by Matthew Garrett, who is amazing, and I did just briefly, is that actually readable or not? So anyway, I recommend checking it out. It's on his blog. Make sure you get the second one. He's done 2 blogs. The first one is good, but the second one really goes into the nitty-gritty details of why what Microsoft has requested is not fair. And it's interesting. I had quite a long conversation. Matthew was very kind, and he spent a chunk of time going through the details of it with me, which was helpful. So I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on that, but it's a good blog. It's an interesting read. We have published we do have this document. I was quite fortunate. So there's 2 amusing stories about this. So I had written this. I wrote this. So to get it working, you can just go into our BIOS, and there's the allow Microsoft party UEFI. So you just toggle that, you're back to normal. So the certificate's enabled. So it is just a BIOS setting away. But obviously, we're kind of sitting there going, hey, people who don't know this, I know I've had some people saying, it's not working, and that's what Matthew here. If you go read his blog, he had a Z13, and he was looking at the Pludon TPM, and he was like, "Hey, this isn't working," and why not? So those are the fixes for it. I will say I can't give you details, especially on a recorded presentation, but we are talking to Microsoft about it. From their point of view, they have, there have been some interesting vulnerabilities with boot hole, and there's a few others, and they're kind of, from there, I can understand the argument that it increases the attack surface, but read Matthew's blog. We're also protected against that with the TPM PCR7, so that discussion is ongoing. I obviously can't share details on it, but it was good. This is, I think, I'm partly responsible for this. I knew this was coming, and I didn't really think through the ramifications, and that's on me. But it was good. Matthew raised it, could have a discussion, and hopefully we're at the stage where we can have a discussion and reach a conclusion. Either Microsoft have a valid point, and in which case, how do we address it, or they don't, and hopefully we can change it. I can't make any promises at this point, but yeah, that's the plan. Does that answer what you were looking for?
Ish.
So,
the big problem that we've had in the community, as the shim maintainers, is that this came as a surprise.
Yeah.
We've been working on shim, we've been reviewing shim, we've been working with Microsoft for a number of years to make our review process work for us and them, for example, and then this came out of left field.
Which is interesting, because I have definitely had conversations with people in the community. Now, not you. And again, this is part of my learning experience. I have talked to, and I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but I have talked to other people. I have flagged it within the people I know. Everybody is running like crazy, so I think something a step was missed. I did a presentation on this, the Fedora release party a little bit ago. Okay. So yeah, it's one of those. I agree. I personally probably should take a big chunk of the blame for not having raised a bigger flag or done some more checking. I thought I had, but not good enough.
Sure. I'm not blaming you, personally. I don't particularly blame the hardware vendors. This is purely on Microsoft for pulling this.
No, from my point of view, because I've talked a lot to the Shimpy, were you aware of the issues with FWUpd and the shim not working with FWUpd? There was a regression, which is...
There's been a whole slew of things we've been working on,
I know the people to talk to.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, man, should have... Sometimes it's a bit of connecting the dots. So, yeah, I'll take that one.
Sure. So, of course, the worrying thing is, yes, it's possible to go in the BIOS and enable the third-party key.
Yeah.
However, physically getting to the BIOS from a modern Windows PC is beyond most people.
Oh yeah.
You don't even get to hit hit F1 to go into the BIOS. You've got to go through Windows first with fast boot enabled, for example.
Oh.
So it's really not an easy thing. A typical person will struggle to find the instructions on Google, for example, let alone actually follow them. So this is a deeply disturbing problem for us. And of course, it's a breach of trust.
Yes. No, that part of it I'm not going to comment on. I do not want to be involved in your
exactly.
case.
yeah, exactly. I said, not blaming you, but it would have been wonderful to have had a discussion about this rather than have it dropped on us. And that's the bit that hurts.
Yeah, no, I'm totally with you. So the other, just as an amusing side story, because it was quite fun, Matthew's blog came out, I did a presentation for Fedora, very, very low key. And I was like, yeah, this is community, nobody much is going to watch this. And now that video is linked everywhere, and I'm like, oh, great. Alrighty. We have a question?
Yeah. Hello, Mark.
Hey.
First of all, thanks a lot for all your efforts and your job to make better experience for Linux users and the Debian community. And my question is regarding to the previous slide.
Yep.
With the internal staff training, it doesn't mean that now we have got the possibility to be helped directly by Lenovo regarding to Debian and Lenovo laptops. Is this true?
Yeah. Yes-ish. So actually, yeah, I kind of glossed over that point. So excuse me. So it's getting better. I'm not going to promise you it's perfect. And if you bear in mind, you're talking to a support team that has been supporting Windows for years. That's the experience they have. We have tips, basically, and if you call in from, all of that is Windows-based. That's what they're used to. Now, we do have Linux tips, so if you call common problems, they should be able to help you out with. They do have that. But it's taken a step that you will still get, and again, you have to consider this from a support team's point of view, what they're used to supporting and what they expect. So I know if you call them with Debian, they will sit there and go, well, there's two problems. One, usually if you brought your PC with Windows, they will want you to be running what it originally came with. So that's been a big problem. And then quite often they will insist that you run the Ubuntu preload that we have. And again, from my point of view, this doesn't make any sense, but you have to look at it from a support person's point of view. I also have some sympathy as someone who supports Linux users generally. Oh boy, it's a wide world out there, and you get all sorts. You get people who are messing around with fan controls and battery controls, and as you should. That's your computer. You should be able to do what the heck you like. But sometimes you'll be finding things that people did, and you're like, why did you do that? And of course, wide range of kernels. One of the biggest issues I have is you've got somebody who's using an old kernel on a brand new piece of hardware, and they're like, it doesn't work. And you're like, well, yeah, the driver's not there. It's not going to work. You got to update. And then they're like, well, how do I update my yada, yada, yada distro? It's like, I'm sorry, I don't know, right? So that's a challenge and ongoing. But, I mean, so the short answer is getting much better. I have definitely, the number of support requests I get in is going up, which kind of sucks, but it's a good thing. So I'm not going to promise it's good, and I think I meant to correct that slide and everything else, because I think I said completed. It's ongoing, right? I do training sessions with the support team and that stuff, but you should be able to call and get support. Depends a little bit who you've got and all that, but there's definitely that. We have some support, particularly on the Premier support, some who are really quite good now, and they're using we have our own ticket system internally, and they're using that. So progress. Alrighty. Any other questions? Otherwise, I'll pick a topic at random. So, just because it's fun, because it's got a nice picture. So I'm going to go to the X13S. There you go. See. Yeah. So that's my laptop, which my daughter took a fancy photo of. But anyway, so X13S is the new ARM-based laptop that we have out. It is not part of the Linux program. So we have been working with ARM and Lenovo to do a proof of concept. So see what it takes to get Linux running on it. I didn't know if I was going to be allowed to put this up, but they said I could. So it's not official, and it's not an official support. We're not going to be having this online with anything, but we are basically doing some work to see what we can get up and running. So it's there. There's a bunch of stuff that doesn't work. Audio isn't working yet. Wi-Fi isn't working yet. Power management is a bit flaky. We're not sure we can get the camera working, and that's a separate topic, but we can do it. There's an amusing story from the guy who's been doing main development on it, who actually did a presentation on this to Qualcomm, and they said, we'd like to see it. And he was like, yep, you just have. So I love that story. So it's there. If you're interested in finding out more about it, let me know. Unfortunately, because I was limited, I didn't want to go through security with a stack of laptops, so I didn't bring it with me. But yeah, it's kind of cool. It's, and this is, I don't know, for me, this was a fun project because we do, you know, with the Linux team, we have our defined things, but this was one of those. ARM reached out and said, hey, can we do this? And I was actually able to make it happen. There was quite a, you know, stuff internally. And because we have a Linux program at Lenovo, it means stuff like this becomes possible. So it's exciting. I think it's nice that we can start to do more stuff than just the formula. Alrighty. Oh, question.
Question from the pad here. So it says, will it be possible to simply install it with Debian installer, put on a USB stick?
That's the aim. So actually, I don't know. So that was installed with a Debian installer. That's why it's got Debian. So the developer working on it is he's got a Debian installer. It's not a standard one. He's had to make changes. I have an instruction sheet on how to do it. The biggest thing that's missing right now is you have to go mess around with the boot variables. So there's it's still device tree based instead of ACPI, and that's going to take a much longer time to solve generally. But so it's device tree. We have a few things to do. We need to put the firmware up in Linux firmware so that it's available. Right now, at the moment, it's not. And you need to change the bootloader, which is Lenovo firmware. You need to change that to present the device tree to the Linux kernel, and then boom, it'll go. So that stage has not been done, and that's all part of this proof of concept. But once we get that firmware in place, then we'll be working with the distros, and I assume Debian will be part of it to make it so it is just Debian install come up. There will be limitations. There will be. It's, but yeah, that's the aim. It's supposed to be, you know, as easy as possible. Hello, hello, all the way back.
Hey, so what's the state of this, of Qualcomm support upstream for this SOC? Or are you, sorry, I should qualify that. How about on the kernel side? Is all the necessary stuff, or most of it, upstream or going upstream, or is this still running off a Qualcomm BSP kernel?
No, it's going upstream. I think it's under review. I think some of the patches may have been accepted, but no, everything will be upstream. Yes, no, I could jump to that open source contribution slide. I could use it as a segue, but yeah, no, I'm only interested in if it goes upstream. The aim of this particularly was to see if we could do it properly. They did. One of the previous Lenovo laptops, they did it, but there was a lot of hackery. Yeah. And I don't know, have you played with I think it was a C630?
I haven't. It's just my experience with Qualcomm BSP and then trying to get an upstream kernel running on that is, at the time at least, there was a huge gap between what was in there, what was working in the BSP and what was working upstream.
Yeah. And I know I'm less involved in the nitty-gritty details of this, too busy, but I know there's still quite a lot of discussion around device tree versus ACPI, and this is device tree, right? So, and there's patches to go around working with that. So I think that longer term, ACPI is going to be the answer so that we don't need firmware loaders, so it works on any vendor, but this is a starting point. Again, a lot of this goes back to the idea pad is you've got to kind of prove there's a market for it. It makes a difference, right? A lot of this, that was done with the aim of helping ARM developers who want to build natively. So that, we're kind of proving it. If we can get it up, there's been a bunch of interest in it. And so I can take that back to Lenovo and say, hey, there's a ton of interest in this. What about the Gen 2 doing it officially? That's the aim. Alrighty. Any questions? Otherwise, I will segue to the open source contributions because you kind of offered me a window. So, yeah, just because we touched on it, everything upstream is basically the core of what we do. I don't want any of these extra pieces. This was a bit of a thrown together page. Well, it looks really weird with the screen. But anyway, I will call out specifically because it's my main Debian, I don't know, thing, but I do maintain, not maintain, I'm not actually a DM or DD or anything like that, but they do firmware solve. So that's the audio needed for the Intel platforms, Tiger Lake onwards. So I do that. I've been doing the updates. I'm actually, if anybody's really eagle-eyed, there's a new release that was released 2 weeks ago, and I still haven't done that. So turns out I've got some work to do. But it's there, and I think we've been doing the updates, and I think it's working. I think it benefits everybody. So continuing to do that. And then the rest, the main one that for me is exciting is, so we've been doing more kernel patches, and I've got more members of my team doing it. So before it was just me, and I think got 3 of the others on my team who have done their first kernel patch. If anybody's contributed to the kernel, you know it's a steep learning curve, and you know we're working with the kernel community and making sure you do everything just right. So happy to get more of my team involved. We don't do as much as I'd like. We rely a lot on, you know, Canonical and Red Hat, but we're doing more, which are like platform profiles. Matt Parser, I mentioned that because that was fun. If anybody used the USB dongles or a dock, 5 minutes left. Wow. But Canonical pushed a patch up, and the maintainer rejected it and said, no, Lenovo should be figuring out a better solution. So we actually took that, and we went and we talked to them, and we looked at what they wanted, and we were like, that doesn't make any sense. And we did come up with a slight tune pack, and they accepted it. So it's good as a vendor to be directly involved. I'm going to pull up just LVFS, because I think LVFS is an amazing project. So that was actually that little picture there, but 15 million downloads, which just like blows my mind. 500 plus different devices. So this, bizarrely, one of the issues I have is I have no telemetry. Linux privacy is super, super important. I have no way of telling if you bought a Windows machine and put Debian on it. None at all, right? Lenovo have nothing. This is as close as it gets for me to be able to say, there's a heap of Linux users out there running on our devices. So 15 million downloads, that's pretty amazing. And just, I mean, shout out to the LVFS project, just amazing project. And we're doing more and more. I think I had it on the previous slide. We've had a few firsts. So we have battery firmware up there, camera firmware up there, Thunderbolt controller up there. We did actually get docks. Docks is a little bit of a sore point. Dock support is really hard. But we did actually get some dock firmware on LVFS too. It's good. I love LVFS. I think it's and one of my favorite questions is Lenovo Vantage. People are like, I want Lenovo Vantage on Linux. It's like, okay, what do you want? I want the firmware updates. It's like, no, you really don't. Yeah, this is what you want. No, I want driver updates. It's like, no, you really don't. You want that upstream. So that's been kind of fun. Alrighty, I think I might be running very low on time. Any last questions? Press the wrong thing. Any last questions? I did want to, so before I jump, any last questions? All right, so, see, I spent a long time on this slide. I spent hours. I'm here for a week. I would really, really love to know, so I do install, this is running Debian. I'd love to know your Debian experiences on our laptops. I would love to know what works, what doesn't work. I think there are issues. I think there are things that I would like us to be involved with. So come talk to me. I'm here, and yeah, just come find me. I'll try and hang around in the Hack Labs a bunch and just grab me. Is that a good point to wrap up? Oh, possibly a last question?
Thank you. So sleep issues, yeah.
Yeah, I'm tired too. Jet lag's awful. Sorry.
Now, laptop-related sleep issues. Modern laptops are phasing out S3, and
Yes.
that's that. Closer. Oh, okay. So S3 is being phased out,
Yes.
and S2 idle is very hard to debug. Actually, my only debug device is my backpack. When I pick out my laptop, is it hot or not?
Yeah.
And
we've had some scary bugs in that area. Yep.
yes, and it's even told that it may void my guarantee and some stuff like that.
Okay.
So have you got a general impression about the situation in this regard? So it's across vendors as far as I could tell.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. So Intel have been SOIX only since Tiger Lake, so a few generations. AMD are only supporting SOIX from this year onwards. The Z13, Z16, they're Rembrandt-based, is SOIX. So I have to say I have some sympathy for the vendors. We did, on the Intels, we supported 2 different sleep modes. We did S3 and SOIX last year and the year before. It was a nightmare because you're more than doubling up the amount of testing and work. And we had issues with touchpad resume on S3. So you have to bear in mind the vendors were testing with 1 minute left. So the vendors testing with Windows is all SOIX. So I understand completely why they're standardizing on it. I think it's getting a lot better. I will actually say I think I've seen fewer problems in this year's with SOIX than previously. I 100% agree. It's been a painful teething process. AMD are going to go through that. I think actually they've done a lot. Honestly, the work that AMD have done this year on getting that enabled, and if you had one of the last 2 years AMD platforms, the work that they've done to make SOIX work is actually really good for your power usage, believe it or not. It's better. It's not the answer you want, but I understand why the vendors do it, and I think it's something which we just have to make it work better. Some of the tools are getting better. I know there's an Intel on GitLab. They have an SOIX test utility. I use that a lot, and if I get people who have sleep issues, it's like, run that and let me know. We certify it, which helps, but on the uncertified laptops, it's tough.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, I think we're out.
All right, we're out of time. Thank you very much, Mark. And he'll be around, like you said, so feel free to approach him. Thank you.
Thank you.